Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to the program. I am, as you can see, joined by Pepe Escobar, journalist, geopolitical analyst. I call him the scribe of the multipolar world. Pepe, thank you so much for joining me again tonight from Asia.
Thank you, Danny. Greetings from Southeast Asia to you and
Yes.
everybody. Oh, it's not late night, but it's night.
Yes, it is late evening where you are, Pepe. And before we get started, let me just make sure the audience knows to hit the like button. That helps boost the stream and the algorithm. You can find Pepe Escobar's Telegram and X accounts in the video description. That's where you can find all of his work, including the many articles that he writes and contributes for publications like The Cradle, Strategic Culture, and many more. So, Pepe, I wanted to just begin by asking you first your assessment on the state of Project Ukraine, because on the one hand, you have Russia already warning NATO about the F-16s that are supposedly on their way. There's a huge bounty on the F-16s, I believe 15 million rubles for the first unit to strike one of these F-16s. And then you have a flurry of news coming out of Ukraine that shows how bad things are. Parliament is effectively dissolved. It doesn't really function anymore. You have Ukrainian men fleeing their return to the front lines, dying, in that attempt to flee. And of course, you have the slow grind of Ukrainian soldiers and weapons just completely being, eviscerated by Russian forces. So the NATO summit occurred. You wrote a piece about this in mid-July. Wanted to know your assessment of where NATO stands vis-a-vis Project Ukraine, given not just the political turmoil inside of Ukraine on the front lines, as well as the turmoil afflicting its paymasters, its sponsors.
Well, Danny, this looks like it happened last year or 10 years ago, and it happened last week. It's amazing, isn't it? The thing is, I am in Asia, and here life is very, very, very dynamic and speedy, and it proceeds with an incredible acceleration, because not only you have the West is very far away from here, even Russia is very, very far away, and of course everything here turns around what's happening with ASEAN, the ASEAN 10. I am at probably strategically the most important one, Thailand, and China, of course. And there's the plenum this week in Beijing, very, very important, which I thought I will have time to concentrate on. But then we had that famous Iwo Jima 2.0 photograph this past weekend, which was a game changer. And all that to come back to your question, because we are already, to give an idea, discussing here in Southeast Asia, in Hong Kong. I'm flying to Hong Kong in a few hours to get inside China information. The best place to get inside China information, it's not Beijing or Shanghai, it's Hong Kong, because the information flows from all sides, all angles. So the discussion here in Asia is already what's going to happen to NATO after Trump. People already assume from Japan to Hong Kong to the major capitals in Southeast Asia, even to India, that there's going to be an avalanche in November. So Trump is practically elected. Of course, it's not like that. It's still 3.5 months before the election, which in politics is like a stratospheric voyage, But this is already the tone of what's being discussed in China and in Southeast Asia. Well, what happened during the NATO summit was extremely worrying, because they doubled down on their suicide process, in fact. Not only, there were two main themes at the NATO summit. Of course, Russophobia and the forever war on Russia, which should go on indefinitely. And they picked a fight with China frontally via, of course, that epileptic slab of Norwegian wood, which hopefully is on the way out to be substituted by formless Dutch Gouda, known in Holland as Rotten Rutte, the former Dutch prime minister. And nothing's going to change with NATO. But the problem is what NATO did in the summit to pick a direct fight in their final joint statement, which is something terrifying if you read the whole thing, against Russia and China. And not to mention the partnerships, and that's included in the joint statement as well, in the Middle East. And of course, there are NATO Robocop expansion all over Eurasia and the Rimland as well. So this is already being turned upside down by what happened in Pennsylvania this past weekend. We know that the emphasis on NATO is going to be very different under Trump, and it's going to be essentially about money. And the emphasis is not going to be the forever war against Russia. The emphasis, which has already been telegraphed, faxed, and telegrammed by Trump and by his second in command, Mr. Vance, which has an extraordinary biography. But what the biographies don't say is who helped him to get where he is today. We'll go back to that later on.
Sure.
So they are already telegraphing that the top existential threat is China. And Vance already said that we need to do something about Iran in a very threatening tone. And he qualified what's happening in Gaza as, his own words, small bombings. So that tells you where we're gonna, what kind of foreign policy we're gonna have next year, assuming this Trump avalanche is going to manifest itself. So you can imagine the headless chicken parade in Brussels in this past few days, since Saturday, Sunday, to put it this way. Nobody knows what's going to happen to NATO in practice from now on, apart from things that were decided even before the joint declaration, which this weaponizing in excess, especially towards Romania, positioning Germany as a sort of a NATO guardian in the Eastern European front. These partnerships in the Middle East. And of course, the 40 billion plus that will not go to Ukraine, as we all know, will be in the money laundering machine inside the industrial military complex. And, some scraps will end up in Kiev. Add to it the fact that the sweaty sweatshirt in Kiev and the whole thing, they completely disappeared from the news cycle everywhere, literally. Not only here in Southeast Asia or Eurasia as a whole, but also in the West. The only thing people talk about in the West exactly is, of course, the famous bullet. And, of course, the possible avalanche. And, of course, the absolute desperation on the damn side, because they never had a plan B, and now they have to come up with a plan B in a matter of not weeks, in a matter of days. So, and this is exactly the theme of my column, which is going to come out soon. I extrapolate from the Iwo Jima 2.0 pick, which is iconic in itself. It doesn't matter how they got it. The fact is that they got it. And it doesn't matter if it the composition of the pick was pre-arranged. It doesn't matter at all. What matters is the pop phenomenon. And this is something I commented before. In China, in the Chinese Weibo and in Japan, this pick is now something seen by, I would say, now probably over 1 billion people in Asia. Right. It's absolutely amazing. It's anime, it's memes, it's absolutely outstanding. And it's photos, it's Chinese making puns with Comrade Trump, different declinations of Comrade Trump. And it's a pop phenomenon. And the way it's being interpreted in Asia as a whole, I would say, is Trump as a pop superstar. Apart from, it's completely decontextualized, in fact. It's like Trump is a sort of older Taylor Swift. This is how it's being seen all across. Can you imagine, Danny, that on Monday, there were already Trump iconic fist T-shirts in a mega mall here in Bangkok? Because the Chinese start producing this, fabricating these shirts from Saturday night to Sunday morning Asia time. So the distribution channels, the supply chain distribution channels all over Asia, they were, less than 48 hours later, they were already working. So it's the contrast between this, all this, the sociological part of this pop phenomenon, decontextualized from the fact that this will probably be another war party declination, but the war against the BRICS will change from war against Russia to war against China and Iran. And this is already being said as we speak, And in the middle of all that, once again, the suicidal Europeans are caught in the middle, and they are absolutely clueless. And they cannot, first of all, they cannot understand the ramifications of what happened in Pennsylvania this week, not yet. The only thing that they think is that under Trump, if it happens, Europe is going to be even more of a victim than it already is. That's how to organize a common European plan when we see dissent inside NATO, and especially dissent inside EU, spreading everywhere. When you have, for instance, Hungary directly involved via the Prime Minister and their very competent Minister of Foreign Relations in a parallel diplomacy that finds support everywhere they go, be it Beijing, be it Moscow, even in the corridors of the UN where they are at the moment. And among European citizens, what Orban is trying to do is viewed with extreme sympathy. It's the absolute opposite of what's happening with the toxic European Commission. And even the fact that now the spotlight is starting to get over toxic Medusa von der Leyen because of the COVID shenanigans with Pfizer. So this is something that could develop in the next few months into throw the witch in jail, that kind of stuff. No, it's not impossible. So what immediately happened after the NATO summit in DC, by the way, at the Empire, not in one of the Empire of Bases, it was turned upside down by what happened in Pennsylvania, and now it's headless chicken territory everywhere, not only in the EU setup, but also in the NATO setup. And they have reasons to be worried, because the way Trump would deal with NATO would be something that our friend Annalena 360 degrees will be thinking, oh, maybe this is really a 180-degree shift. So this is where we are at the moment. So all of us, we are trying to put this together. It's too soon. We need to wait, I would say, at least another 2 or 3 weeks to see how things are going to evolve after the Republican convention in the US. A few more echoes by Trump of what would be his platform, especially his foreign policy platform. And of course, what's happening in China this week, which is extremely important, the plenum, the economic decisions that they're going to make, which will be important for the next 5 years, in fact. And there is a very important meeting this week in Beijing as well. Xi is receiving a delegation from the Arab countries, including MBZ from the UAE, Sisi, the King of Bahrain, a lot of people. It's part of those seminars that they have, China Arab World. And they will be discussing Palestine. And in a very Chinese, very sophisticated way, they will be trying to make these Arab leaders understand that, look, you have to be more proactive. We got some of you into BRICS. We need a BRICS. We do have a BRICS consensual position on Palestine. For the moment, nothing is advancing. And I'm sure Xi Jinping, talking to them person to person, is going to be slightly more forceful than before. Because a lot of people across the global majority are asking the extremely serious question: why the BRICS, and especially why Russia and China, are not doing more than what they're doing on behalf of Palestine and to defend Palestine? This is an extremely serious question, and it's not being addressed by Russia and China. We have to be straightforward about that, right? The only ones who are actually doing something, once again, the Houthis in Yemen. Heroes of the whole planet, you know. In fact, you mentioned one of these columns that I published a few days ago. I was very, very impressed by the meeting that I had with this special advisor of the Prime Minister of Yemen, Sana, a government of national, let's say, national union, let's put it this way. And you could see he's a very well-prepared man, an academic, and he was in Moscow, and he's still there. The delegation is still there. And they cannot get a formal meeting with the Russian Minister of Agriculture to explain to them face-to-face what they need, because there is a famine still going on in Yemen, what they can propose, how, for instance, they can set up a shipping line between the port of Hodeida and Russian ports, what they can export, including their exceptionally good coffee, for instance, grain that they need to import from Russia. So this is a Russian interest. But then, when we look at the geopolitical arrangement, which is extremely complicated, in fact, there are two governments in Yemen, and internationally recognized rules-based international order government, between commas, actually sits in a hotel in Riyadh. Is not in Yemen, you know. And the popular government in Yemen is the one in Sana'a. Is when you see millions of people in downtown Sana'a, in their demonstrations pro-Palestine, for instance. This is the popular government. And they had two delegations in Moscow before I came here to Southeast Asia, so 2.5 weeks ago. They had two delegations in Moscow. So the political delegation, they had a very important meeting with the Russian representative for the Middle East, Bogdanov. But the geoeconomic delegation, talking about matters of life and death, including saving millions of lives from dying of starvation, they were having problems because of essentially because of bureaucracy, So I was extremely struck. I was very saddened by all that. With my minimal means, I tried everything, contacts, but you stumble into the inner bureaucracy, the ministerial bureaucracy in Russia, which is very, very complicated. And there's nothing much a foreigner can do about that. But I'm glad that, for instance, that this column is a drop in the ocean, but at least it's been circulating a lot and translating a lot, because I try at least to explain their predicament. And Yemen, they need all the help they can get. And the number one actors able to help Yemenis as a whole are the BRICS, and among them Russia and China. So I hope Xi this week in Beijing also talks about Yemen with these people who will be talking to face, including, for instance, MBZ from the Emirates. And that's very, very complicated, because the Emirates may be in BRICS, but they are, even if they are not technically at war, they remain at war with Yemen, essentially, as much as the Saudis. And the Saudis restarted to threaten Yemen again these past few days and weeks. So Yemen is fighting two wars in two different fronts, very, very serious wars. They are fighting the Anglo-Americans because they are trying to protect Palestine and defend Palestine, which they qualify as our people, their terminology. And they are fighting the Saudis and in the background, the Emiratis as well, which are BRICS members. So this is just to give you then, and all of you, how complex the situation is, but it's very, very sad.
Yeah, and maybe we could talk more about Russia and its, I would call it maybe a pivot to Asia over the years. But even just in July, we saw so much occur, not only with what you just described with its talks with, Yemen, the article you wrote, which I can pull up as you're speaking, which had so much, I think, incredible detail about the complicated geopolitical situation, as you said. But then you also had Putin's meeting with Modi, Narendra Modi of India, which really angered the United States and the neocons in particular. You also have Russia and China engaging in military drills as we speak, which is July 17th, whoever views this later. And not only this, but you also have China as well. If we talk about Eurasia and where Belarus fits, we have ongoing military exercises between Belarus and China after the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, which maybe you could touch on as well, which admitted Belarus. So you have all of this occurring. You have NATO really not happy with China for being on NATO's doorstep, as they called it. And you also have Russia making all of these pivots to Asia, getting much closer with Asia, whether it's India, whether, of course, everyone knows about the China partnership, but it's much deeper than that. It goes into West Asia and to the rest of Eurasia. So, Pepe, could you talk about the significance of all of this?
Well, it's good. I'm going to get a lot of excellent information in Hong Kong on the Chinese position. Not only what they plan to do for the economy these next few years, but some foreign policy details that they're very easy to discuss in Hong Kong with Chinese insiders, especially those insiders who do the back and forth between Shanghai and Beijing. Sectors of the Hong Kong, let's say the Hong Kong aristocracy, which is essentially Shanghainese, and the flow of information that you get in Hong Kong it's much more dynamic than if you were in China, where you are more or less corralled by what comes from Xinhua and from that pyramid of information. You know, in Hong Kong, you have debate and debates of all factions, and the debates among some academics in some of the universities, not necessarily Hong Kong University, they are wonderful. So it's the best place to get the pulse of China as well. And I am very, very curious about, and I'm eager to learn more details about the real foreign policy Chinese position inside BRICS. What the Chinese are actually telling, especially the Russians and the Indians, of course, inside BRICS. Because there is a more or less a consensus that the BRICS now need a unified position on the major international relation dramas all over the world, but they still don't have it. Far from it. For instance, the number one reason why Russia cannot be more forceful in terms of Yemen is that they have to be the mediators between Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates as well. That's very, very complicated for the Russians. And India, it's more complicated. For India, what's happening in Gaza is very, very far away from the point of view of Indian elites and from the point of view of Modi's preoccupations as well. You know, the problem is India, or not generalizing, Modi and very important sectors of the Indian ruling class, they like to pose as leaders of the global South. You cannot be a leader of the global South if you don't have a really forceful policy regarding the rights of the Palestinians. And this is something that at least Russia and China are pressing all the time, not to mention Iran. Saudi Arabia, not a word. So that tells you everything. The Emirates, not a word. That tells you everything. And Modi, sporadically. So that's not very good for their self-image of leaders of the global South, you know. And of course, there is the bureaucratic problem of trying to organize the summit in Kazan, which is now 3 months away. It's literally tomorrow, in October. And they need, first of all, they need to organize the internal regimentation inside BRICS. Lavrov already said there won't be any expansion, but everybody's still knocking on the door, and they want to get some signals at the summit in October in Kazan that they are being considered, and maybe, you know, the next batch next year they'll be in, including a lot from here, Southeast Asia. There are at least 3 very powerful Southeast Asian members. In fact, the 3 top powers in Southeast Asia: Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia. I'll put the 4th one, Vietnam. The 4 of them want to be part of BRICS. So half of Southeast Asia really matters, wants to be part of it. Singapore is different. Singapore, as we all know, it's an American aircraft carrier near the Strait of Malacca. It's a completely different story. And everybody knows that. But these 4 very important Southeast Asian powers, they are getting closer and closer with Russia and China, not necessarily with India. You see? So for our friend Sergei Ryabkov, master diplomat, no question about it, he has to tackle all that. He is the Russian BRICS Sherpa, the #1 Russian diplomat, organizing what's happening there. So I cannot even imagine. He cannot sleep at night. He can't, because these internal problems inside BRICS, they are very, very serious. Not to mention, on the case of Brazil, I'm not going to even start about it. Which it's okay. I'll qualify it with 1 adjective: pathetic at the moment. That's it. Let's leave it at that. And I heard complaints from different sectors that Brazil is not taking BRICS seriously. And this is the impression that I have from the outside. And when I ask my best sources in Brazil, they say, yes, It's true, unfortunately. So can you imagine having to deal with all that? And at the same time, you need to be what Xi should do this week, and he'll probably do it. This meeting is going to be probably Thursday. Very forceful on a unified BRICS position on Palestine, in conjunction with the Russians. Yemen is from the point of view of, we hope that China will be more forceful on Yemen, but Chinese diplomacy doesn't work like this. Somebody will have to take the initiative, and this somebody would have to be Russia. Iran by itself inside BRICS, no, they are new members, and they are being accommodated inside BRICS. So all of this, once again, to give all of you a little bit of the complexity involved in all these discussions, and the fact that at the same time, on an auspicious, positive angle, they are looking at the progressive integration of BRICS and SCO, which was absolutely obvious following the SCO summit in Astana. Like, once again, it was only a few days ago, and it seems like it was last year, because the speed of everything is completely demented. So we have this progressive integration, which is in terms of actual projects, BRICS, SCO, Eurasian Economic Union, and ASEAN, all that is progressing and relatively fast. For instance, since I arrived back here in Southeast Asia, I heard amazing things about the progressive integration of Eurasian Economic Union and ASEAN. For instance, when I mentioned here that during the Eurasian Economic Union ASEAN round in the St. Petersburg Forum, the ties were not there. They were pissed here. Said, how come? Why they did not invite us? We should have been there. Malaysia was there. Myanmar was there. The Philippines, the mayor of Cebu in Philippines was on the table. And there were no ties. And the ties are very much inclined not only to get inside BRICS, but to eventually make a deal with the Eurasian Economic Union as well. The Russian embassy here in Bangkok is extremely active. Top-level diplomats. I met some of them. And, of course, the relations with China, which is another thing that I had a direct confirmation these past few days. On the absolutely first class, at the highest level, relations between the Thai monarchy and the Chinese Communist Party. How many people in the West know that? Very, very few. Very, very few. And this points to how the Americans usually don't know how to read all these countries in Southeast Asia. And Thailand is a very, very complicated, because there are a lot of American investment here. The Americans are everywhere. Well, I am across the street. My neighbor across the street is the residence of the American ambassador, just to give you an idea. My neighborhood is mini America everywhere, State Department people, the American embassy is a 10-minute walk from here. You see all the major American corporations have enormous investments here. But at the same time, you see the Chinese playing Go in a very important market for them here. And they are getting, they are encircling what they want Chinese way, and it's amazing. It's no wonder that China is the #1 trade partner of all the 10 at ASEAN. And now in Bangkok, when you look around, it's very impressive, because now even in detail, things that you didn't notice a year ago, they're everywhere. Like you see ICBC branches, bank branches. You see who owns these office towers. When you go, the owners are Chinese. That kind of stuff. It's very, very impressive. So, and the fact that now there is a consensus among most ASEAN that their future is not only good relations with China, but good relations with the wider Eurasia space, and that includes Russia, Central Asia, etc. What NATO plans to do, anything that NATO plans to do in Eurasia becomes, a lousy joke, in fact. So they will be trying to act on the rimland, especially parts of the Middle East, maybe try to instill the famous color revolution again in some of the smaller stans, especially Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. But that's it. That's not more than that. And of course, I saw that you put the title of our conversation is Game Changer, Game Over. But not yet. I was going to tell you not yet, Danny, because this is only if we see this weaponizing of Romania going uphill, let's say the next few months. And of course, mid-term to longer term, the re-weaponization of Germany. Then we're going to have a response. From the point of view of Kiev, the only thing that they have at the moment with the whole thing collapsing is terror attacks. So, it's complicated because the Ministry of Defense in Russia does not allow these things to circulate. There is a military censorship de facto. But, it's easy to see that attacks against installations and civilian installations inside the Russian Federation, they happen practically on a daily basis. This is extremely serious because this is a de facto red line. And for the moment, the only Russian response is to bomb military or dual installations across Kiev. It's not enough. So sooner or later, in one of these attacks against civilian installations inside the Russian Federation, we can have an enormous amount of civilian casualties. And then what's going to happen? Apart from Medvedev going online with one of his apocalyptic posts, that's not enough. So that's the main problem. In military terms, Moscow is not exactly worried about what could happen this next few months. They are worried about this transfer of power in NATO, assuming the new Dutch specimen has some warmongering ideas, not yet fleshed out by Stoltenberg, but basically they are the same. And they try an extra provocation before the American elections. The famous summer we lived in dangers, the summer of living dangerously. So this is where we are at the moment. So everything is a sort of in suspension, in fact, and this is it's worrying in many senses, because it could allow one of these rogue actors, even acting inside NATO, to try something completely absurd, completely crazy. Probably it won't come from the US, because now their fish to fry are what the Dems are going to do to prevent an avalanche in November, which at the moment seems to be inevitable.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about it feels like what you're saying. Yes, this conflict could go on for a very long time, but we are entering almost like a post-Ukraine project world,
Yes.
where while the conflict may go on, business as usual will not. So you have, of course, Putin, Xi Jinping, Russia, China moving more eastward, integrating Eurasia really toward the east. I mean, even the SCO Belarus admission, and then what's happened afterward, and of course that relationship between those three countries feels like, well, you could say Belarus is firmly in Eastern Europe. You could argue
Yes.
that it is moving well farther toward Asia, in line with Russia's vision. So given all of this, and as you said, the political situation in the US and in NATO is very tenuous, with what happens in maybe in November. I've always been skeptical given Trump's record when he was first president, but we are in a different ball game in the sense that Ukraine is a lost war. So that's a different scenario than perhaps Trump entering into the buildup to that war, like in 2016. But do you see, or maybe you can answer the question of how do you see NATO then reacting given this potential political avalanche within its own sphere? And of course, these moves toward Asia by Russia and China. Do you feel like NATO will go along with a transition toward focusing on, let's say, China and Iran? Or will they fight hard to maintain its Russia posture?
Exactly. Let's say the inner workings of NATO, everything was always geared towards a war against Russia. So now it's absolutely crazy. They are not only they are losing the war against Russia, the proxy war against Russia, but now their joint statement and approved by all the members, they're going to start. It's not a soft war. They're going to start a hybrid war against China, but with escalation, because they are the only thing that they understand about the Russia-China strategic partnership is that now there is a bundle. You, Beijing, now you are an enabler of the Russian aggression. Obviously, they don't understand anything about the Russia-China strategic partnership and how it works. So we'll keep having the same rhetorical blah, blah, blahs about the four strategic threats: Russia, China, Iran, and DPRK, because the think tanks, this is what they tell NATO to say and do. This comes from the RAND Corporation. This comes from the Atlantic Council. If you read what they publish, it's exactly the same bullshit. And this is the bullshit that is spilled out by NATO in Brussels. This is not going to change. So maybe we could have, we are lucky enough, let's say, to have a lull between now and November, the elections, considering that even the American generals who actually run NATO, they know that in 3.5 months, things are going to change and the priorities will be very, very different. And Trump, for everything that we know about Trump, he's not going to launch a war. He might launch a renewed trade war against China, but softly. The most dangerous part is what could happen between Trump 2.0 and Iran. Now, this is starting to become even more serious because they're already talking about that now, 3.5 months before the election. Member of BRICS and member of the SCO. So I'm not sure people in DC and our friends in DC, they say they have no clue about how not only BRICS, but how the SCO works. Nothing. Absolutely. They ignore it. For instance, the summit in Astana, in fact, I think Judge Knapp told me, was not reported in the US at all. So they have no idea what's being discussed among the major Eurasian powers. So everything that could happen between now and the elections, the only positive aspect is this law, because the industrial military complex, in fact, it will be waiting for the new orders coming from Trump 2.0 and how they are going to re-engineer this war against two peer competitors at the same time, and how they're going to ramp up the provocations in Taiwan. And this is something that the Chinese are calculating on their side. The Chinese are calculating what's going to happen next year in terms of a new tsunami of sanctions against China. They're already prepared. This is what they're discussing in the plenum this week, and what they're going to start implementing starting next week already. Preparation. Yeah, there's going to be a tsunami. It's inevitable. And at the same time, the military preparations to, let's say, isolate Taiwan completely from any provocation or possible false flags.
Yeah. Well, one aspect of the potential escalations with China that's interesting is that one of the reasons, at least this is what I'm told by many Chinese I know in the mainland, is one of the reasons why Donald Trump is almost venerated as you called him, a pop star, is not only because of the optics of all of this. We could literally just look at what happened and see that the optics are quite entertaining. Serious issue, of course, assassination, yes, but of course after the fact, there's a lot that you can do with it. And as we've seen, the Chinese have made keychains, t-shirts, etc. And you've seen it in Thailand. But I wanted to just say that also a big reason on the political front is that there are many Chinese who see Trump's China policy as open, as vitriolic as it was during his administration, is actually quite beneficial to China because it isolated pro-Western forces who felt very uncomfortable with aligning themselves with such a person who was so obviously anti-China that that would make them seem so anti-China, which the liberal position in China, maybe the anti-government position, which is a minority, but it exists, is we're doing this for China. This is good for China. Well, you can't do that if the side that you're siding with is literally saying that, they want to bring China down. And they feel like that has actually helped empower China. The more Trump talks a certain way about China, it makes a lot of Chinese people on the mainland say, wow, I think we need, even if we have disagreements, we need to unite around China's project, no matter where they fall on the political spectrum. So that is something that makes people actually like Trump in a sense in China. But I'll kick it back to you.
Of course, because he's a unifying factor for the Chinese.
Yeah.
No question about it. He said something, I think, yesterday that was absolutely fantastic. He basically said, TSMC, they stole our technology and they didn't give us anything in return. Now they have to pay. So obviously he doesn't know how the semiconductor industry works. No? First of all. And second, it's always a sort of a mafia thing. Look, you're getting something, you're stealing from us, so now you have to pay. Otherwise, it's fascinating. So obviously when the Chinese read something like this, they feel emboldened. Exactly. And I think the great thing this past year, especially, when they started to see that they were recovering from COVID, there are, of course, enormous problems, real estate, shadow banking, you name it, but they are recovering. They grew 5% in the first semester. No matter those stupid headlines on Wall Street Journal, etc. They grew 4.9% in the second quarter. Blah, 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 blah. Stupid. They grew 5% in the first semester. Nobody does that. Very few, 3 or 4. Who did that? In fact, I don't even remember. But some countries in Africa, I think, are growing a lot, but they need to, right? So this week, the plenum, they have their best minds, their best meritocratic minds, coming up with a plan for the next development of Chinese economy for the next 5 years. So this is very, very serious, and they are absolutely aware that with the change of administration in the U.S., things are going to get much tougher. They don't have a problem with that. Just look at Huawei. Huawei is inaugurating a new headquarters, a new spectacular scientific park near Shanghai, outside of Shanghai. They spent $1.5 billion to build this thing. They're going to transfer, if not everybody, but most people who were the scientists who work in their Shenzhen scientific park, which I had the honor and the pleasure to visit 8 years ago. I was thinking about that. I went there 8 years ago, and it was already something unbelievable. So now they're building something even more unbelievable and even more high tech outside of Shanghai, and they want to attract foreign talent as well, not only Chinese. Basically, they are saying to all the best IT specialists all over the world, come here. Shanghai, one of the capitals of the future, already here. Everything. We built 100 cafes for you inside our technology park. And you are side by side with Shanghai, one of the best cities in the world. A lot of people will come. And Huawei, don't forget that even under sanctions, they came up with the most sophisticated smartphone ever with their own operating system, which they're going to relaunch this year again before the end of this year. So, they don't care. They are making 7nm, 5nm chips, their own technology, etc. So TSMC, they didn't steal anything from the Americans. And the Chinese, they looked at what TSMC did, and they're doing it their way. And it helps that the back and forth of engineering talent between Taiwan and the mainland is non-stop. So there's no secret to TSMC. Sooner or later, the Chinese will have, okay, this is what they're doing. We're going to do it even better. And, all the money that we need to do all that in record time. So what you said is absolutely correct. It's an extra incentive for them to surpass themselves all the time.
Yeah. And I want, and maybe, I know it's late for you, Pepe. So let's wrap up on this question. I wanted to bring up a question from a super chat because I think it relates to this, and I'll just say my take, right? Because here a viewer is asking, do we believe in the nationalist right wing of Europe, Pepe? Are they really anti-plutocracy or just anti-current plutocracy so they can choose a more allied ruling elite? And I wanted to put this in the context of what we've been talking about because I know Vladimir Putin said he prefers Joe Biden because of the predictability. But there's also something to be said both for Russia and China for someone like Donald Trump, who's kind of a chaos agent and illuminates and almost by doing very little. He doesn't have to do very much, just kind of exist, say what he says, as he said about Taiwan. I mean, I saw how Bloomberg and others have reacted to that interview I think he gave with Bloomberg, where he said, well, maybe Taiwan has to start paying, not just for the TSMC issue, but also for the military spending that goes on there, right? The real issue at hand, right? Making Taiwan into a U.S. aircraft carrier. So for both Russia and China, I feel like even though, yes, Biden is predictable, so China and Russia, I believe, can deal with Biden pretty easily. Trump may not be as predictable, and you don't know where he's going to go, whether he's going to completely align with the elite or not, similar to the rest of this, what we call the nationalists, maybe right wing, as Elle is calling them. But I would like to say also that regardless of how we view these individuals, Trump, whoever, the chaos about it does also offer, I think, Russia and China a kind of increased legitimacy. And so I'm wondering your thoughts on that. But you can, of course, answer this question as well.
Yes, it does. For the global majority. Can you imagine that people from Nigeria to Indonesia, they are comparing what they see as literal, flagrant dementia in the US, warmongering instincts out of control in Europe, compared to the rational actors, Russia, China, and as a whole, Eurasia as a whole, discussing on the table, Eurasian Economic Union, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and obviously, everybody's is drawing their conclusions. The list of countries who want to get into BRICS and the SCO speak for itself. Absolutely. The fact that there is a sort of a feeling in the air that nobody can stand unipolarity anymore, which is something that you see in all these fora, not only in Russia, but also in discussions here. For instance, there was a forum in Hong Kong early this week. No, there was next week. There was a forum in Hong Kong next week in Hong Kong, and they were discussing relationship between Hong Kong and the mainland, and they were also discussing Hong Kong has to be aligned with the realignment of Eurasia as a whole as well. This is something that you never heard in Hong Kong only a few years ago. Before COVID, I was living there before. I remember very well. Before COVID, nobody talked about this in Hong Kong. You know, so these things are changing very, very fast. Europe, well, it's always quite. It's quite a phenomenon to talk about Europe when you are in Asia, because here, from the point of view here, Bangkok, Hong Kong, not to mention in China, the West is so far away. And it's very far away from everyday life. Here, the thing that strikes you right away when you arrive at a great Asian metropolis is how dynamic, how creative, how modern, how postmodern it is, and how this human bus projects a sentiment of, you know, moving forward at high speed. It's like you are running on a high-speed train all the time, you know, which is something that obviously you, it's a feeling absolutely impossible when you land in any major Western metropolis. Forget it. This phenomenon of the European right, this is very complicated because the terminology, the only one that I've seen proposing a radical terminological re-examination of everything that stands as right, extreme left, etc., is Michael Hudson. He wrote a fascinating column. I think he published that more or less 2 weeks ago. You can read it on his website. And Michael is saying basically something that all of us who spend most of our time outside of the West already know, that left, right, none of that makes sense anymore. The old left doesn't exist anymore. It was completely destroyed. All the lefts in the West are neoliberal, without exception, all of them. And they are all inside the system. They are not progressive at all, and they don't want to change the system. They are not pro-worker, for instance. And when you look at some of these extreme right parties in Europe, especially, they are pro-workers. They are nationalists, they are sovereigntists, pro-workers, pro-working class, pro-family. Well, this declination of values, let's say conservatives on one side and woke LGBT on the other side, this was a manufactured crisis. And we know who manufactured this crisis, and we know how that started decades ago. And now we are seeing the fruits of the, once again, divide and rule, you know. So the division, the terminological divisions nowadays should be progressives, patriots, people who have a sense of empathy and respect for the other on one side, and the 0.1% on the other side who controls everything, including these political divisions. So this is more or less what Michael was saying in a much more diplomatic way. compared to what I put it the very, very blunt, let's say, old anarchist way for all of you. But basically, this is what it is, that these labels, they don't work anymore. At the same time, all of us, we have to be very careful examining the political platforms of all these political parties. So, and then we can make a judgment, not based on left, right, conservative, liberal, etc., but on real issues themselves. There are many positive aspects of, let's say, extreme right-wing parties that are nationalist patriots and pro-sovereign. And there are many disgusting aspects as well, because many of them, they don't respect the other.
Yes.
And they are racist.
Exactly.
Racist, yes.
Yes.
Of course. That. So we have to understand all that. And at the same time, we cannot, like we could do it in the 60s or the 70s, have this idealization of the left everywhere. It doesn't exist. The real left disappeared completely. Can you believe that maybe in France...
It's a very lonely place, yes.
It's a very lonely place. Maybe the only party in France that it's relatively similar to the old left, the way we imagined from the 60s and the 70s, is the French Communist Party. The only one.
Yeah.
They are not neoliberal. They are pro-working class, really. They are pro-poor families. You don't see that with the Mélenchon gang. You don't see that with the socialists forever. Same thing in Italy. And in Italy, for instance, it's not even political parties, it's individuals, especially academics, and maybe a few journalists and analysts. They because Italy has such an outstanding heritage of political science and political thinking, And when you discuss with them, you see how well informed and how progressive they still are. It's like they were kids in the 60s, with that, let's save the world, let's take care of our brothers. And so this is something that you don't see in Italian political parties, formal political parties. So, so this process of reanalyze the terminology, we should all start to do that and start treating political movements and individuals by what they actually profess in action, especially, not rhetoric, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. As they do, because I think that was a very sophisticated analysis, Pepe, because on the one hand, for me, I would never embrace a good number of positions, especially on the domestic political front, of a lot of parties that may fall on the far right or wherever they identify themselves, or however people identify them in the collective West. I mean, this is just a phenomenon that's occurring, but yet they can flank and they can operate in a more sovereigntist, as you call it, as a more even in a more multipolar. I mean, look at Viktor Orban. For all the things I would not agree with Viktor Orban on other issues, he operates. He is operating as the only diplomat in the European Union, full of so-called liberals. I mean, I wouldn't say it's full of leftists, but really full of liberals and neoliberal parties, institutions that are on a complete, just rabid war footing. So on the one hand, right, like I try to separate the issues because we have to understand the reasons why that is happening. And also, I think people in Europe, just as in the United States, right, I would never, my opinions on the LGBTQ phenomenon are complex. I support their rights. I support, I'll be in solidarity with them under real, when it comes to real issues, but I will never support a political party like the Democratic Party that says they're for LGBTQ rights and then is for bombing people anywhere they can just because they want to maintain hegemony. I think that there's a big schism between those things. You can't be for social justice in one issue and B, for warmongering and literal genocide on another. So that's how I kind of like to think about it. But I know I'm keeping you later, Pepe. Just one more question. There's two.
Yes. Okay.
Maybe you can address together. There's
Okay.
concerned citizen. This question is very, I don't like the framing. I don't even think it's correct. But what does Pepe think of China leasing Gaza the way British leased Hong Kong? I don't think that's happening at all, but you can address
No,
that.
I'm sorry, but this would never happen.
Yeah. And then this is a better question, because I was in Berlin in 2023 hearing from people literally telling me about how repressive it is for, this is before October 7th, for anyone standing for Palestine, anyone opposing Germany's pro-Israel policies, very repressive, like police state kind of thing. But is it time to leave Germany because of inevitable forever wars? Is Russia more approachable for a European with an IT background? What will happen when people don't want to go to war? Essentially, this is targeting Germany. So anyway, your brief comments before I let you go.
By the way, I have German friends who are seriously thinking about leaving Germany. Seriously, yes. And by the way, if you have an IT background, go to Russia. You can work for
They need
Yandex.
it. They really need it. Yes.
and many others. And of course. The only problem would be to learn the language. It's very complicated. But you could start with English, and then, little by little, you transfer to Russia. But a lot of people in Europe are actually seriously considering that. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I would suggest to all of you in Europe, not only Russia, parts of Central Asia. Think about Kazakhstan, for instance. Think about Uzbekistan. These are new republics. They are booming, hardworking people, excellent opportunities for people with a very good technical background, and solid places.
Yeah. And focal points for both Russian investment and Chinese investment, which makes that, you said booming, they will be, because I mean they are products of division. So now that they are reuniting with their literal sisters and brothers,
and at the same time they're building their national identity. This is something fascinating to watch. Every time that I go to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, I'm always impressed by how hard and how professionally they are building their identity, even if they are young republics, in historical terms. Wonderful. Yes. And they are proud of themselves the way they are doing it, which is also, it gets to you as a visitor,
Yeah.
You embrace them immediately.
Well, Pepe, I kept you a while. I just wanted to say we'll have to connect next month before I go to China, because I'll actually be going.
When are you going to China?
I'll be there the last week of August.
Last week of August is good for me, because it will be my last week here, because then I'm back to Russia.
All right. But so let's connect before that. Because
I plan to disappear on the beach for a few days.
But
I'll be working. But I'll be working on the beach. Yes.
Oh yeah. No, I'm just saying at some point in August, maybe we can connect, because I'm actually going, when I go to China, I'll be at the Khorgos port that connects Xinjiang and Kazakhstan. So I really want to talk to you.
Where are you going? Very important. Where are you going?
Ili province. I'll be in Ili province.
Oh, Ili is fantastic. You're gonna go by rail.
Wait.
You're gonna go by rail, man. Yeah.
I can't wait to go to the ports, because as you said, I mean, that's like a huge node, as you like to use, for Kazakhstan and China's relations. And one last thing, when I was in China last July in 2023, when you mentioned Thailand, how close they are, it was the mutual dialogue for exchanges and mutual learning. A dialogue for mutual learning. It's Chinese translation.
Right.
A dialogue on mutual learning and exchanges among civilizations, and there are so many Thai academics there, and the big focus was Belt and Road Initiative for like all of them. it was like anyone you met from Thailand that was in a room with you, they were researching the Belt and Road Initiative. So that's kind of
and you have excellent universities here, and they have courses on Belt and
Right.
Road. It's fantastic.
Right.
Yeah.
So Pepe, everyone can find your
We'll
work.
talk about China. We'll talk about China before you go. Absolutely.
Yes. Let's connect sometime before August 25th, and I'll be in touch. Take care, man. It was great talking to you.
Care.
Get some sleep
Take
on
care.
the flight.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Bye-bye. All right, everyone. That was Pepe Escobar. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I was going to do perhaps a story, but I don't know if I will. Let me just do shout outs. And before I go, I want to say thank you to all the Patreon subscribers. You all make this work possible. Do support this channel on Patreon at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. If you become an annual member for as little as a cup of coffee, I believe, per month, you will, or at least in the Western sense, a cup of coffee for a month, you will be supporting independent media. You will help keep this channel going. And also you will help me fight censorship, because there is never a moment that we can not assume that a channel like mine will be around forever, right? Many others have unfortunately faced fates from YouTube that have been just incredibly damaging to their ability to do the work. So do go to the video description. You can subscribe on Patreon. If Patreon is not your thing, Substack is also available, as well as YouTube membership. I want to shout out to all the YouTube members in the audience. All of you are amazing. I know we have a new member, CC. Thank you so much for your membership. Okay, CC, you are very much appreciated. But if I go into the chat, I'll just say I see Sherry in the chat. You were here also yesterday with Ali Abunima, which you can go to that interview right after this and catch that playback on Gaza, where we speak a lot more extensively on Gaza, West Asia, etc. I see a lot of moderators here, so let me shout them out. I see Ware, I see Desert Mantis, I see David. Who else is here? Anyone else here? So I see those moderators. Okay, so that is great. Great to see all of you. Now let me go to the super chats and shout out the super chats I did not get to read. First, I want to say thank you, Saeed, for your membership. You are very much appreciated. Thank you so much for becoming a member here on YouTube. I didn't read this last question because I only read one per super chatter. Maloney have connection to historic fascism. Orban is calling to unite a nationalist EU. He is close to the Latin American right. What does that mean? Well, I will reiterate my position. I know you probably had that question, Ella, for Pepe, but I will just say that my position on this matter is that, yes, I do not venerate. Really, I don't venerate any establishment force, right? We're talking about the realm of geopolitics. We're talking about very high level relationships at the geopolitical level. And of course, when it comes to countries that have longstanding histories of being either pushed to a political right stance, being maybe products of a long Cold War to empower more political elites that have this kind of anti-communist character, that is to be expected. And that is for the people of Hungary, of course, to struggle over, to work out. My position, though, is that at the level of global politics and geopolitics, things get more complex because, of course, there's going to be things we might abhor if you are on the political left. Maybe some people who watch this channel don't abhor it at all and view, that whatever your position may be, the point is that we are talking about a geopolitical situation where the neoliberal so-called center, which I believe is right wing, right? The neoliberals are right wing, but they have lost legitimacy. Their model of foreign policy, which is to follow along with the neocons, which is to go along with their endless war and empire regime, they have lost legitimacy. They have basically mixed and melded with what used to be called the right wing, right? The neocons, but they have completely merged with them in a big tent of what is the biggest threat to humanity. So this so-called resurgent right wing, I don't really see as monolithic. I see it as one, yes, ideologically, there might be things that I definitely disagree with and I wouldn't endorse. I would never say, yeah, go, go, go. I hope that these parties win. But what I do hope wins is the conditions that make it possible for someone like Viktor Orban to do what he did. So I don't really quibble. I do not condemn someone like Viktor Orban for doing what he did, going to Russia, going to China, trying to wage peace. If China and Russia are not condemning it, why would I? Right? I think politics gets well more sophisticated when we look at the fact that someone like Viktor Orban could actually be a service to the cause of peace, and we have to support that. Now, I think it becomes different when we talk about someone like J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, because we're talking about the hegemon here. We are talking about a much higher level of geopolitical positioning and relationships that is well and way more complex. And not just complex, but also we know that what is not complex is the fact that the United States occupies a certain position, that it is owned and operated by a blob of warmongering sycophants who in many respects are profiteering from war first and looking for geopolitical position in alignment with those profiteering aims. When we look at those who actually control, right, some people call it the deep state, the United States government, the United States foreign policy regime, then we know that someone like Donald Trump, no matter how much he talks, won't have the room necessary to even enact what is a very divided and a very inconsistent foreign policy platform. As Pepe Escobar said right here on this program, we can expect a Trump regime to maneuver toward Iran and China in a much more aggressive manner, which is, to be quite honest, a very scary thing, given that Joe Biden is no dove. This idea of there being doves and hawks with China or Iran doesn't exist. Joe Biden is a China hawk and an Iran hawk. The fact that Trump and Vance may take it further with these countries is scary, because unless there is a complete rapprochement, which is not going to happen, let's be quite clear. There are people who think a rapprochement is going to happen between the US and Russia. Donald Trump will not be alive if he seriously pursues that. Just remember this, okay? Because what happened to him in that rally, I don't know if it has any connections. Of course, there's some Russian, I think there, I don't know. No, the Ukrainian opposition figure has said maybe there's a connection between your position on Ukraine and that attempt on your life. Well, maybe it's all speculation. But if he seriously considers rapprochement, the conditions that allowed for him to be in this position in the first place isn't the jingoism, isn't any of the anti-migrant stuff. It isn't the whatever liberals like to say is so scary about Donald Trump. It's what they actually prioritize as an anti-Trump position, which is Russia and this Cold War furor, right? This Cold War just diseased mind that they have, what they have done with Russia, what they have done to basically make him out into this existential threat when he is American made, right? He is made in the USA. Everything about him is. But the point here is that it is that kind of activity which has brought him, it is even just his words that brought such vitriol against him. And now, if there's any attempt by him to actually pursue rapprochement, Ukraine project, who knows? There will be a huge, of course, protest, opposition to winding down anything in Ukraine, as tiny of the steps it may be. But if he were to actually go for rapprochement with Russia, it didn't happen in 2016, that administration, because of the, let's be quite honest. Of course, we can question Trump's actual ideas and values, but what comes first, right? Does power come first, or what we think in our minds, right? I believe it's power that comes first. It's the conditions of power. How does that look? What are the relationships? Before anyone's thinking can actually influence anything. I could say, hey, let's have a rapprochement today with Russia. It's not going to happen. Why? I don't have the power. Donald Trump, much more powerful than I am. He may be the president in 2024. Goes into Washington, says, I want a rapprochement. What do you think is going to happen? They're going to slap it down. And when it's slapped down, what does Trump do? He says, okay, I'll keep talking my game, but I'll go the way that will ensure my political survival. Even if I wouldn't call Trump a pro-Russia at all, right? Trump is simply navigating a foreign policy regime and an empire that has so few options now, right? So if we can't get at Russia, if we can't defeat Russia, even said it in this interview, then we'll with the sanctions and all of that, then we should go after the real threat, right? China, Iran. That's what JD Vance says. That's what their foreign policy is expected to be. So the point here is that the United States is a different beast. It doesn't really occupy a role given the arrangement of forces inside of Washington to be any kind of force for good, right? It can't, no matter how conservative or how left wing people may think it is based on the establishment. There really is no such thing. There is one war party. And if you go against that war party, you will have to face the donors. You will have to face the elites who actually control the war party. And what will they do? Well, they'll silence you. They'll disempower you. They might even kill you. That's just the reality. We have history for people a lot less powerful than Donald Trump and a lot less influential who have been punished severely for just demanding something and maybe organizing an effective and effort to make it happen. So that's what I will say about this idea about historic fascism. Yes, they may. I'm not an expert on. I know that Le Pen does. I mean, I know from her family, right, that she is connected to that regime, that Francoist regime. Yes, but at the same time, we have to look at the historic moment now. And now what the historic moment says is that the neoliberal so-called center, really the neoliberal fascists or imperialists, they have lost legitimacy. What that has done, even in a place like France, it's opened up opportunities for a segment of the left. But as Pepe Escobar said, and I agree with this, and I didn't say it when he was here, but I'll say it now, is although I am very much in favor of Mélenchon's foreign policy, his leadership over that, I don't see a coalition of the French so-called left as being united enough in being able to fight against its own neoliberal divisions, its own neoliberal cancers that reside within it, to be able to have influence over the French government to take a different position on foreign policy, to actually enact a different foreign policy. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I am, because I'm not an expert here. I don't study French parliament, but I do know from years and years of, let's say, French socialist rule, what did we get out of that, right? What did we get out of that during the Obama years? Wasn't good, right? It was not good. Out of the Trump years, it wasn't good. So France wasn't moving toward a multipolar world. It was steadily moving toward what Macron ultimately enacted, which was a regime of neoliberalism, a regime of empire, one that is a vassal to the United States' empire. So, and I do want to address this question too, concerned citizen, because I just found it to be a strange question. All right. Because on the one hand here, you have this equivalency that is often made about China that is just so off base, right? One can criticize, and I allow it on this channel because I'm not, as many people might believe, an agent of the Communist Party of China or its government. I do not endorse everything the Chinese government does. I understand, however, China's very complicated position as an emerging power, one that is still underdeveloped in most economic senses, even though we could say it has such a high GDP, high level of trade, high level of development in certain areas. But in many areas of China, underdevelopment persists. Its GDP per capita is still pretty low. It is just over 10,000 US dollars. That's still a pretty low number. So China has a long way to go still economically, despite its massive advancements and despite the fact that it has taken the lead economically in so many realms and diplomatically, because it does have a genius foreign policy in so many areas. And so you might say, well, why isn't Gaza one of those areas? We could have a debate about that, right? Because I understand, right? Pepe Escobar has been on the show. Ali Abu Nima has been on the show. They have said, and I allow it because I think it's a legitimate position. I'm not going to say you are incorrect when you say China should be doing more. Richard Medhurst has said it to a degree on this channel. You need to be doing more because the moment calls for it. I agree with that. I think the moment calls for everybody, all nations, all leaders, to do more on this issue. However, we always have to look at what exists in front of us when we say we need to be doing more, because we have to be very clear. Politics, everyone, politics is not about morals. We may think it is. I wish it were. I wish we could think good thoughts and be all, and if we are pro-humanity, anti-genocide, then it just happens, right? That if we can get enough people to think the same way, then we will get what we want, right? That's not how politics works. So while you could probably ask 1.4 billion people in China about the Palestine issue, and 90% of them would probably say, well, we support Palestine. We don't think genocide is a good thing. We oppose what Israel is doing. Well, you could probably go anywhere around the world and probably get that from public opinion. The realities on the ground make it difficult. Now, this isn't to make excuses, because of course rhetoric could certainly be ramped up. Maybe even support could be ramped up in certain ways. I would like to hear what people think about support, because it gets really delicate when you start saying, well, China needs to help Gaza win, help the resistance win. They need to fortify the axis of resistance. Because I believe if China were to do that, or Russia were to do that, well, there would be hell to pay at all levels. And China and Russia still have to think about their own national projects, their own economic development, their own political legitimacy, right? Because there are costs to war. So many costs that not even Iran is there. Iran has a powerful military. Iran probably does have the ability to just annihilate Israel. If it wanted to end the war with Israel, it could. But what would the costs be? Potentially nuclear war? Or potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions, dying in what would be a regional conflict that would see the United States and Israel take out whatever they had left, especially in air power, to just lay waste to the region. Now, that's not to say that Russia and China and Iran, they don't have air defense systems, all of that. But now you're talking about a world war scenario that leads to the end of humanity. So do you see why I say that it's more complex? Okay. And not only this, but this idea that China is a colonial power in Gaza, of all places, but anywhere, just belies the facts. China isn't leasing anything. China will help rebuild Gaza after the conflict, but it will do so in a way that respects the rights of Palestinian self-determination. Name me one place where it hasn't done that. We can always expect that from China. If there's anything that you want to say beneficial about China or positive about China, it should be that it respects the sovereignty of other countries, so much so that it refuses to interfere in conflicts between each other. Because guess what? China considers Palestine a nation. Russia considers Palestine a nation. So if it stands on the side of Palestine militarily, for example, in this conflict, then it stands opposed to Israel and the United States. And that means war. That means another war for Russia. And that means a big war for China when it has problems and issues it has to deal with on its own borders, its own issues with militarization of the South China Sea, the United States arming, funding, putting bases all around China to secure and noose around it along what they call the First Island chain, sending Marines there, training, all of this, weapons to Taiwan, trying to separate Taiwan from the mainland. These are real military and political issues that China still has to deal with as it tries to develop and emerge as a leader in the multipolar world. So yes, it is not as simple, but one thing we can always, and we should I just want to put this out there, and hammer it home. We should understand about how Russia and China operate. On the one hand, we may be disappointed in their lack of a stronger rhetoric, although I believe China stands on the right for Palestinians to arm themselves and resist occupation is as good as it gets. You might be disappointed with the two-state solution because now most people around the world are questioning, at least in public opinion, whether the two-state solution is at all viable. That's all well and good. You can do that. But I want to just put out there that China's ability to build and Russia's ability to build a multipolar world, to unite and integrate Eurasia, especially West Asia, with China, with Russia, into, of course, to the rest of the world, also perhaps lays the conditions for the liberation of Palestine, for the end to conflict as we know it in this region, because it means the opportunities for this, the development of this means that the United States gets weaker and weaker and weaker, and we get to that point where it is more possible. One, look at what October 8th onward has been. It has been an unhinged genocidal campaign and war for what? For Israel's legitimacy, because it was rendered illegitimate when the prisoners broke out and did what they did, which is show that they have the ability to strike back, right? That's what they did. And they did it because there are many reasons why they have to fight. They have to fight because their family members are rotting in Israeli dungeons, Israeli gulags, Israeli torture chambers, and the fact that their land is being stripped from them. They're under siege. They are blockaded completely. They're starving. This is before October 7th. Before, right? So the ability for Russia and China to develop this multipolar world is critical. And it's critical to the independence and sovereignty for the entire region, the entire Arab world, the entire Muslim world in this region, and the end of U.S. hegemony as we know it there. So I do believe that economic integration, development, building up the conditions for prosperity, building up the conditions for industrialization, gives nations and peoples opportunities that they might not have had in the past. Of course, you can say, well, what does that mean now for the people suffering in Gaza? Well, it probably doesn't mean that much. Right? It probably doesn't mean that much. But that's also a simplification because, look, who goes to Russia and China? Is it Israeli leaders? Are you seeing Netanyahu taking a meeting in Beijing right now? Are you seeing Netanyahu sitting in Moscow in the Kremlin, having tea, having a drink with Putin? No. Who is? It's the Palestinian groups. That's who's going. Putin, Xi Jinping, Russia, and China really are changing everything about world development, world politics. If you don't think it's fast enough, you don't think it's good enough, you can have that opinion. But the facts are that if the Yemenis, if Ansar Allah, if the resistance all across the axis of resistance see Russia and China in a positive light, then I'm going to trust them. I'm going to trust that they know that they aren't being colonized by China, that they are not going to be treated like the British treated Hong Kong. An absolutely ridiculous assertion, an absolutely afactual and ahistorical comparison. Hong Kong was a tortured colony. There was no democracy. People were flogged in the streets if they resisted, killed, brutal massacres of workers who went on strike in Hong Kong for the independence of Hong Kong from British colonialism back to China, right? That's the real independence movement, not that proxy war, astroturfed BS that we have seen in Hong Kong, right? Funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. No, the real independence movement in Hong Kong came with the people who fought to reintegrate with the rest of China. Why? Because British colonialism was a terror. It was a horrible experience. It was disgusting. It was inhumane. It was a colonial experience. China doesn't do that to Gaza. What an insult to not just Gaza, not just to the Palestinians, but to the entire West Asia region, which has only seen one colonial force in its history, and that is the West. The West has been the colonial force. Look up Sykes-Picot. Look up the history. Look what the French and the British did. The British was the sponsor of Israel. It helped bring Israel into birth before the United States came along and replaced its now British vassal as the top colonial power. We call it imperial power now in the region. So that is the real history. But the reality of the present shows that even if we are critical, and I'm not going to reject criticism, I'm not going to say you shouldn't be critical in a time where people are dying en masse, where they are suffering. I'm not going to challenge that. That would be absolutely ridiculous, right? We need the 100 flowers blooming in this sense, right? We need, I'm sure, I'm going to China soon. A lot of people are going to be open to this. They're going to be open to, when is this going to stop? You can see the Palestinian flag waving in Tiananmen at times. But at the same time, the geopolitical reality, the global reality, China's position, Russia's position means that delicate progress toward independence and sovereign multipolarity is where the course is going to be directed now, because it's not the time for a global war. If it were, it would have already happened. And we know that the global war will be ignited by one force and one force only, and that is the force that has always been mired in world war, and that is the West. This is the path of the West. Russia and China are trying to prevent it, and they're trying to prevent it because they believe in the survival of humanity. They believe in the prosperity of humanity. They believe that humanity is better off if development, if integration, if common prosperity can be achieved by all. But they have to do it within this world that is being suffocated by the empire. Something will give. Don't you worry. I mean, maybe some of you are not old enough to be able to see it. I do believe I'm going to see it. I may be close to death by the time it happens. I don't know. But I believe I am going to see a major conflagration because I believe we're not too far from it. And that major conflagration will come immense pain, immense disaster, immense suffering. But it will bring, I believe, the end of hegemony of the hegemony of the United States. And that means a brighter future for everybody. So that brighter future is, I very much believe, possible. I don't think the United States has a trump card. I don't think nuclear war is going to achieve anything. People will go on, and the multipolar world will go on. I don't think that's ever going to be ejected from the historical moment that we're in from here and in perpetuity. Of course, you can say, oh, Danny, you're naive. Nothing is forever. No, something else will occur. But I'm saying for as long as I don't think there's going to be a reversal. You can't stop a moving train when it's got no brakes, right? You just can't. And I don't think multipolarity has brakes. I don't think developers like this can be arrested through the means by which the U.S. and NATO possess. I don't think so. But that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Doesn't mean there's going to be pain. And look at this moment we're in. How many Ukrainians, how many Palestinians, how many people have had to suffer because of the attempt by the unipolar world to keep what they stole? A lot. All right, everybody, that's it for me. I am out of here. I gave you a little bit of a rant. I haven't been doing stories after these interviews. Let me see if there's any more super chats. Yes, we have. I know China is helping build loans with Africa that West are predatory. How true is the statement? Not that I believe China, USA, but China hasn't exactly been fully good either. Or are they all good? Says Wing of Shoe. Thanks for the super chat. I think, again, we're talking in morals, right? So for me, Chinese investment is not really about morals. Okay. Chinese investment in Africa, and they say it outright. This isn't aid. This isn't charity to African people. This is economic relations. This is win-win cooperation. This is business. Okay. That is what China's relations with Africa are. But then we have to look at, well, is anything all good or all bad in this world? Is there anything? Because when we look at trade with Africa. China and Africa trade is over 200 billion US dollars. It dwarfs the United States almost by a factor of 10 at this point. That trade goes into what? Infrastructure development, right? These loans are building ports, they're building transportation, they're building electrical grids, right? You can see incredible maps of how China essentially is electrifying all of Africa. It's building dams like in Ethiopia. I mean, we can go on and on. It's building true infrastructure. For what? To help African countries possess the basis for industrialization. Because without infrastructure, without roads, without electricity, you can't develop an economy. You will be incredibly poor, and that's what Africa has been. It has never been able to get out of the throes in the chains and shackles of Western colonialism. It has not been able to do it. In fact, many of its borders are byproducts of Western colonialism, which were meant and designed to cut off peoples from each other, cut off nationalities from each other, and cut off economies from each other. That was the point of colonialism. Why? Because the West was competing. Belgium was competing with France, which was competing with British, etc., etc. So if you look at China's trade, business is not always benevolent, okay? So one of the major issues that China and Africa have to deal with is incongruities in their relationships, political issues, for example, private Chinese companies coming in, working with certain governments, those governments not following through. Maybe the Chinese company doesn't follow through, and then the business goes bust, right? And that's not good for anybody. That happens quite a lot. I read Deborah Brotgom. She wrote The Dragon's Gift. This was back in 2008, 2009. But she's over at Johns Hopkins. She's written a lot about this relationship between China and Africa, and she's seen it firsthand. She's seen, for example, projects in Sierra Leone completely abandoned. Not because China and the Chinese investors were like, oh, this is just not good enough. It's because there were incongruities in the relationship. A Chinese company wanted to build infrastructure around farming. The Sierra Leone government just couldn't abide, didn't have what it took. There wasn't enough investment there, and it led to a drop in the project. Okay, so that is a lot of where the troubles reside. But we have to understand it's not really about good and bad. It's about cost benefit. So yes, there are some costs to doing business, as there always is, but the benefits between African countries and China are immense. Not only does China get to tap into Africa's vast wealth, which China has its own kind of mineral wealth, but China is lacking in basically everything else, right? So like China has the goods underground to build, right, polysilicon and things like, to build solar panels and things like that, because it has polysilicon, etc. It's basically the place where all that resides, but it doesn't have other things. It doesn't have the cobalt, all that stuff, the other kind of minerals, the energy resources that Africa presides over. So it's great for China. But then what China can bring to Africa with really no political strings attached. Yes, there has to be an exchange economically, but there are no political strings attached. Zimbabwe isn't being told you're going to be sanctioned if you don't do what we say, like the United States does and the UN does under US auspices to Zimbabwe. China isn't going to Eritrea and saying, we're going to overthrow your government if you don't align with us politically. No, that's what the United States has said to Eritrea, but China doesn't do that. African countries have seen this, right? Senegal, for example, another country, deep relations with China. We can go all across the African continent, deep relations with China, because they see that regardless of the character of that government, we don't have to like all of the governments on the African continent. There are many that are Rwanda, for example, right? Paul Kagame, not necessarily a nice guy. He has presided over, with U.S. support, a genocide in the DRC. But these leaders see that China is not going to, you can judge China for all you want about it, but China isn't going to interfere politically there. It's going to develop win-win relations. It's going to build where it can. And that brings benefits to people. And so morals don't factor in. And you might say, wow, that's not really inspirational, but it's not supposed to be, right? It's supposed to be about winning. It's supposed to be about benefiting. It's supposed to be about growing and prospering together. African people are going to have to be the ones to liberate themselves from the scourge of what still remains of this Western sponsored terror that people have gone through in that continent for so many centuries. It's going to be up to them. Nobody on the African continent wants China to come in and begin ruling them, right? The same goes for Russia. Russia has huge military relationships with especially the new emerging, maybe post um, um, African states, the West African states, like Mali, Niger, right? Huge military relationships there. Does Mali want Russia to rule it? No, the people of Mali don't want Russia to rule over them. They want to rule themselves. This is the principle of self-determination. And that's not necessarily even a moral. That is a fact of, if you've gone through an experience like colonialism, like the divisions and the suffering of it, then most likely a good number, not everybody, but a good number are going to want to determine their own destinies eventually. So China doesn't operate on the basis. It's actually, its policy of non-interference is so ironclad that people have a problem with it. People who claim to know better in the collective West have a problem with it. They believe it's not good enough. It's not principled enough. It's not strong enough. I mean, I think when it comes to Gaza, I kind of make an exception there because of the horror. But we could go even before October 7th. How many people were criticizing in the collective West, even if they weren't for warmongering on China? A lot of them would criticize China's lack of leadership on all of the issues of injustice, right? Why isn't it stopping these wars? Look at what happened with Libya. I believe Libya was a mistake for both Russia and China, but they were under different leadership then, and it's very complicated, right? I don't believe Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin, if he was in power at that time, would have co-signed Libya. But it happened. So you have to understand that years of inertia of trying to coexist with an empire can have consequences that are not maybe likable, but they're there and they exist. And it's all for me to say that China and Africa are building a relationship which is by far more beneficial than Africa's relationship with the collective West. So much more beneficial that it is a complete, there is no comparing, right? It is a complete difference. There is no comparison. Africa gets to progress with a relationship with China and regress in a relationship with the West. That's how it has been for many years now. But it is so important for us to understand that if we want to see a stronger position on the world stage for the multipolar world and the leaders of it, if we want to see them get real, like go harder and faster, they're going to need our help. We have to take some responsibility. We have to understand that it is our governments, our political systems, our so-called economies, if we can even call them that, that are standing in the way, that are making it so that the multipolar world has to walk on a tightrope, has to walk across eggshells and dodge them. That's the reality. So we have to take some responsibility. I get it. We are feeling quite powerless. There's a lot of powerlessness that comes with living inside of a dying empire. But we can criticize, but we cannot condemn, and we cannot oppose the emerging multipolar world for not being perfect, right? Especially when a higher level of living, a higher level of justice, a higher level of values and morals and principles can only exist with the absence, with the excision of empire from the world. U.S. empire, Western empire. We haven't gotten there yet. We're not really that close. But the opportunities are there because the empire is dying. When are we going to take the responsibility and finally start making those funeral arrangements, right? When are we going to start going to our leaders and saying, no more, you're done? Oh, you don't want to leave? Well, we'll make you leave. That's the question. All right, everybody, I've been ranting long enough. Thank you so much, Wing of Shu, for that question. All right, everybody. Take care. One small announcement. I will probably, I may stream on Saturday solo, but next week I'm looking to get some guests for the Netanyahu visit. All right. So be on the lookout for that. With all that said, everybody, as you leave here, I'll be on the lookout. Make sure you hit the notification bell. Everyone, hit the notification bell if you are subscribed to me. And if you're not subscribed to me, subscribe because you need to get notified for these streams. When you go to the video description, do check out Patreon. Do subscribe if you can. And I will be back soon to notify you of more updates as I have them. Take care and peace out.